First, I want to thank you for inviting me to present the Mount Everest Biogas Project. I'm Garry Porter, obviously, and our website is there, next chart. I know we're running late. I know many of us are very tired, and some of us are thinking about dinner tonight. So I'll try to hold my briefing to the 30 minutes. But I have a roadmap. I like agendas. They're a roadmap for me as a speaker so I don't get lost and go out into the weeds and then not know where I'm coming to the end. And you in the audience can know when I'm nearing the end of my briefing. So it's a win-win for both of us. Pardon? Do what?
He's asking you to use the microphone.
Oh, I thought that's what you put this on for. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Conrad. Okay, so this is my roadmap. So you'll know where I'm at, and you'll know where I'm getting close to being done. So it's good for all of us. So I'm going to talk about the problem. Next chart, please. You've seen this chart at least twice in the last couple of days. This is 2012. This is the string of climbers coming from Camp 3 on Lhotse Face. That's the yellow tents down there, and they're heading to Camp 4. They'll shortly take a left turn and head up to the yellow band. I show this only because that's part of the problem. A little quick history. Nepal was opened up for tourism in 1950. 3 years later was the first summit of Mount Everest. 10 years after that, the first American team to summit. And then between the period of 2000 and 2006, there were 501 expeditions with roughly 5,000 climbers. And this year, 2012, there were 900 climbers and about 1,000 tents. Next chart. So this is where they live. Anywhere upwards of 30 to 60 days at base camp. This is a piece of it. The only reason I want to show this to you is right there in the middle, you see a green tent. That is the pooper tent. And by and large, the waste is separated because the urine does not go in there. The pooper tent has a blue barrel underneath it. You heard that talked about last night. Next chart. And so this is kind of the movement. Oh, does that work? Okay. So this is the movement of the blue barrels containing solid human waste that the expedition pay for by the kilo to have the human waste hauled off of base camp. By park rules, all waste must be removed from the mountain. So they pay porters. And there's probably a joke in there. The porters haul the poop, and porters up here talking to you about how to get rid of it. But they haul it down to a little town called Gorak Shep. It consists of about 5 to 6 tea houses. And these are pictures of the porters hauling it down. They're paid by the kilo. Those are probably 30-kilo barrels, blue barrels. And the picture over on the far left, if I can get this thing to work, it's dumped unceremoniously in unlined pits at Gorak Shep. You can see the ski pole for size, and when it fills up, they cover it up and they move on. And they've now gotten to the point that they've filled up the space at Gorak Shep. They have no more room, and so they move below Gorak Shep. Next chart. Oh, do I have it? Oh, I have it. It's back. So this is a site, a waste site now below Gorak Shep because they ran out of room. They can't dig there. It's too rocky, so they built kind of a wall. And that's the human waste thrown in there with kitchen scraps and everything else. And it lays there and rots. They try to cover it, and then they move on. And that's kind of the tribute of the climbers' waste to Mount Everest. And it stinks. It will slowly, particularly the human waste, will dehydrate because of the cold, so it will shrink. And in those pits I showed you earlier, then the dirt falls in, and the yaks can step into it because they're depressed areas. Just so you know, where's Gorak Shep? You see up at the top there, Everest Base Camp. Gorak Shep is this little tea house village, about a 2-hour hike down to Gorak Shep, and then Loboshe is below that. So that's a general, that's the trail to Everest, starting on Lukla where you're flying up through Namche and then up to Gorak Shep. Last stop, last tea house before you go to base camp. And it's, in comparison to base camp, kind of a luxury. And I'm going to show you just some quick pictures. Again, I don't want to spend much time on these. This is Gorak Shep looking back towards Everest. Everest is on the far left. You can't see it in the clouds. This is the walk-in, and you see the blue barrel porters carrying into Gorak Shep, and I want to give you the impression of how desolate that is, how dry it is, and it's at 17,000 feet, and it's very cold. But that's Gorak Shep. And these are the faces. I'll talk a little about this later. We did a site survey at Gorak Shep a year ago in May. We went in and met with both the porters, the two gentlemen. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. This gentleman and this gentleman are the blue barrel porters. We talked to them through an interpreter. And then the four other are the tea house owners. And we went in and asked basically three questions. How do you feel about this human waste coming through Gorak Shep and being dropped there? How do you feel about a proposed biogas digester? Because we presented a concept to them. And what do you see the benefits of it? And I think the thing that came out strongest was the porters. Because they have feelings about human waste even more stronger than we have. They're paid to do that. It's a job. It's now competitive. There are people who want to do that job. The gentleman on the far upper left has been doing it the longest, and we asked him, would he consider if we had a digester that has to be fed daily? You have to mix the waste with water and dump it in the digester. Would that be something he'd want to do? And he said, yes. And he said, if you'd pay me $1,000 a year, I'd do it. And we weren't ready to negotiate with him, but he had a number. The other tea house owners talk about that. And I think the thing that was most prominent is when we opened up Everest to climbers, it's a sacred mountain to us. And we never expected that kind of traffic we're getting today. We don't know what to do with it. When you talk to us about a potential processor to get rid of it, they're excited and yet they're skeptical. They say, hey, we've seen a lot of you Westerners coming through with good ideas and you don't come back. But they do see the benefit, and I'll talk more about that, because one of the benefits of the processing of the human waste in a biogas digester is methane gas. And I'll talk about how much gas we're talking about. So to give you a feel, I can't get my arms, and I don't want to get my arms around 14 ton of human waste every year. 12,000 kilo of human solid waste, not urine, is carried down from base camp and dumped. And that's about 14 tons, so just visualize what that is. I converted that into, that's the equivalent every year of 64 50-gallon barrels. And if you stacked them on top of each other, it'd reach 165 feet in the air. Another gee whiz, if you fill a room 8 by 8 by 7. I don't even want to visualize a room full of poop. But that's what we're doing. The equivalent of 64 barrels. So, who are we? And this thing really started. Dan Majeur is a co-founder with me of this. Some of you may know him. He reached notoriety, not that he planned it, in 2006 when he was guiding. He's been guiding in Nepal and Tibet for about 20 years. He was guiding a group from the Tibetan side, Summit Day, and they come across a guy by the name of Lincoln Hall, an Australian, who had been left for dead and passed up. He was still alive. They gave up their summit attempt and rescued him. Lincoln Hall survived, and that's the kind of guy Dan is. Dan lives half of his life, 6 months a year, in Nepal. He was very knowledgeable about biogas digesters in Nepal. And you know, there's 300,000 of a biogas digester. I'll show you in the next chart what one looks like. 300,000 of them in Nepal. Their goal is to install 26,000 more a year. And he'd been out, looked at them, saw what they did. They're normally in lower farming communities. They're fed farm waste, animal waste, human waste, kitchen scraps. And he and I were talking about Everest. He knew of my background of being an engineer, that I had run programs for the Boeing company, and I'm very end product oriented. I think end product. I'm not a process guy, I'm an end product guy. So we get together and we talk about what can we do about that. We both share a common passion for Mount Everest and its grandeur and the people of Mount Everest. We both are very much aware of when we leave Mount Everest, we see our human waste being brought down and dumped. And that just somehow didn't seem right. I mean, that cannot be our final tribute to these wonderful people. So Dan asked, can we bring existing biogas digester technology to Gorak Shep? Gorak Shep's at 17,000 feet, very cold. They've never been used at that elevation in that kind of a cold climate. That's an engineering question. He's got me hooked. Second question is, if we can implement it, can we sustain it? In other words, we don't want it to be a hole in the ground that is not maintainable by the indigenous people. And third is, if we're successful there, if we can do it at Gorak Shep in the worst climate in the world in terms of cold, can it be replicated lower? If you can do it at 17,000 feet, can you do it at 15? So those were the three fundamental engineering questions, and that's what engineers love. Give me a challenge. All right. So I'm going to spend just a few seconds on this. So this is a typical biogas digester. Some of you may have seen them. They're basically, they're buried in the ground. Biogas Sector Partnership or Program is a company in Nepal. It's an NGO. They are, in essence, the clearinghouse for all biogas implementation in Nepal. And like I say, there's 300,000 of them already running in Nepal. So they're key to this. This is their 6 cubic meter design. They make one 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. You know, they have an off-the-shelf design. This is not the technical problem. It exists. It's technical arrogance on our part to think we should go to Gorak Shep and design a better biogas digester. This works, and so we say we're going to take it off the shelf. That reduces our risk, and they know how to build them. So what you do with a digester, you'll see, oh, I keep hitting the wrong, okay, let's go back. You have a mixing station. You take kitchen waste, farm waste, animal waste, human waste, you mix it with water, usually 1-to-1. You slide it into the digester, and the digester is kept warm. It likes to be at about 20 to 30 degrees. It's an anaerobic process. There's no air. There's 3 types of bacteria in there that basically break the waste down, and they produce methane gas, which you can use for cooking or lighting. And the other thing they produce is an effluent that when it's pushed out, as you add more in, it pushes out over here. The outlet is an effluent that's fertilizer. And I won't say it's pathogen-free because that's a difficult definition, but it's a fertilizer that you can use on crops. And where they've run academic tests on that fertilizer versus bought fertilizer, it's anywhere from 6 to 20% more efficient in production of crops than what you can buy. And it's free, and it comes from human waste. So coming out of the outlet is the effluent fertilizer. Coming out of the dome then is the gas. The gas collects on the dome pressure, and you bleed off the methane gas or the biogas for use in lighting and cooking. And it's used all over Nepal. So it's buried in the ground. And we're going to make the only modifications we're going to make to that design is we're going to have to turn it into a thermos bottle because of the cold ground at Gorak Shep, and we're going to have to provide a heating solution. And that's the technical challenge, has been for 4 years. That's day one. How are you going to keep that thing warm at Gorak Shep, or it'll just become a hole in the ground? So to try to scope this, I says, hey, what's the value of that gas at Gorak Shep? And again, just from a graphic, I think you love these charts. My 11-year-old grandson made them for me because I couldn't figure it out. So he helped me with this. He thought it's kind of cool. If you took those 64 50-gallon drums and you took the gas that it produces every day, you feed it every day, and it produces gas every day. If you took that human waste, processed it inside that digester, it would produce the equivalent in terms of heating. We're not producing propane tanks, we're not pressurizing. Produce the equivalent heating value of about a half of what we call a barbecue propane tank a day. That's a lot of gas. Now, it would be better if we were using animal waste. But we don't have animal waste there, we have human waste. And what's the value of 180 20-pound barbecue tanks at Gorak Shep? So we asked, what's the cost of a tank at Gorak Shep cost? And it's worth, the gas that we produce would be worth about $8,100 a year. That's a lot of money at Gorak Shep. That's economic benefit for doing this, and it's free. Okay, so back to who are we? As said, we're an all-volunteer engineering team. Nobody makes a dime. We're doing this. They all have real life. They all have jobs and families and hobbies, but yet they donate time to this project because they like it. I won't go through all those affiliations other than say we're not a couple of wild-eyed engineers in Seattle. We are very closely affiliated with the Engineers Without Borders in Seattle. In fact, they're the source of most of our engineers that come in, volunteer to work a couple hours, a couple weeks, a couple months to help us on the technical aspects of this design. We're also aligned with Architects Without Borders, and I'll talk about them because one of the conclusions that we've come to is we have to have a shelter over the digester to control the atmospheric temperature over the digester that's buried. We've got faculty members from the University of Washington, Seattle University. We're aligned, and we're forming an alliance with an outfit called Living Earth Institute, who has projects in Nepal of water, sanitation and water projects in remote areas of Nepal. And they've been very successful, and we can learn a lot about how to implement this. Center for Urban Waters, I brought that up earlier. They've done some water testing for us. Again, a bunch of bright PhDs that when we take a question to them, it says, hey, we've run water samples at Gorak Shep, and I'll bring this up a little later. The water sources at Gorak Shep are contaminated, but you can't say it's because of the blue barrel waste. There's no association. And so they've helped us in saying we'll run additional tests on that water which looks at ingredients in that water that can only be found in humans. Now you can start making a correlation between contamination and whether the humans that's in the feces or urine, part of that. And then the three biggies. Biogas Support Program, they're here in Nepal. They're the company I say they're the clearinghouse for biogas development. We have a formal letter of intent with them on working together on this project. They're providing us cost estimates of their help to do this in Nepal because we cannot build this. We'd be crazy to attempt to do this without the experts in Nepal. They're here. They've got all the knowledge. And so we've aligned with them, as well as there's an NGO called Mount Everest Foundation for Sustainable Development, Mephisto. And then the big one is Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee. Their charter is the environmental protection of Mount Everest. And so anything we do in that park, and if we're going to actually build that, has got to be with their approval, their support, and we've got ongoing dialogue. We're answering questions, technical questions. I'm surprised the level of the technical questions they're asking us, but we've got to have them on board or it's a no-go. We know that. And the last bullet I want to make is just to emphasize, we've had a heart-to-heart discussion in this volunteer team that says, do you want to become a business? I mean, do we want to form as a business? And the answer is no. Our intent is not to be a business. We want to do this. We want transparency of design because if you remember one of my earlier bullets, if we're successful, we want to replicate this further. And so we want that design available. Everything's available. If somebody says, I want to do that down further mountain, it's available. And when you set yourself up as a business, you've got a little different objectives. So it was a conscious decision, no, we're not going to form a company. We're going to do this, demonstrate it can be done, and we'll still be there to support it, but we're not going to, it's not a business entity. And we may get forced out of that position only because, well, we may, just from a business standpoint, somebody else could come in and pick it up, and then to replicate it, they charge. And that would not be what we want. But that's our going in position. We're not a business. We're doing this for fun, right? Okay, so this is and I'm going to glaze you over a little engineering. So, first question, when we started this, first question is, will a biogas digester function using only human waste? Because they've been using cattle waste and every other kind of waste. And if that answer is no, then we're done. And but there are biogas digesters that function on human waste only. Like I say, they don't produce as much gas as if you had cattle waste. But they will work. The answer is yes. And then what are the critical performance parameters? And the big thing is temperature. You got to keep those little buggies in there at about 20 to 30 degrees Celsius or they don't break the stuff down. So we got to keep it warm. That's the big driver for our design. And the second thing is you want to retain the digester retention time. You want about 70, 90 days. So you're basically cooking the pathogens before you push them out the other side. So those are the two parameters. The sizing of the digester reflects those parameters, but you got to keep it warm. That's the technical challenge. Now, I'll digress for a second. After we got into this, people asked me, were you and Dan drinking when you took this project on? And I think they looked for yes, because that would find some rationale for why we took this on. But the answer was no. We were sober, but it's a tough technical challenge. But we're winning it. We're winning it. So from an engineering standpoint, you start going, you walk down the engineering thought process. Okay, if you're going to, heat's a big problem. We got to keep that thing warm. So what's the environment at Gorak Shep? So you got to know that. What's it like up there? So we went and acquired something that's called TMY2 data. It's available to anybody if you ask right. It's the typical meteorological year. And it's actually an accumulation of about 30 years of data at Gorak Shep or anywhere in the world. And so it says, what do you think the temperature is going to be like on January the 7th, and ground temperature, air temperature, wind? And so there's a database. It's huge. But there's a database for Gorak Shep. But we need that because the next question is, given those temperatures, ground temperatures, air temperatures, what's the heat loss? Now we're taking a digester and we're wrapping it like a thermos bottle, putting it in the ground. How much heat is it going to lose if you're trying to keep it at 30 degrees Celsius? It's going to lose heat because it's a cold environment. So we modeled the digester. We've got a heat model loss that we have absolute confidence is we know how much loss, how much heat that thing's going to lose, so therefore that's how much we got to replace by some scheme. And that's where it's been interesting. That's where an old engineer like me departs from the young engineers who are used. Remember, I went through engineering school with a slide rule. I don't know how many even know what one is. I went through on a slide rule. The new engineers I'm working with, it's all computers. I'm from Missouri, show me. And when we get into questions like heat loss, they say, oh, I'll scab together this model and put them together, and we put the data in, and it spits a number out, and 10 seconds later I'll tell you what the heat loss is. And I say, that to me is an example of faith-based engineering. I got to really believe this because I don't understand what you did. I got to go back the old way and do it my way. And if we have the same answer, I'll believe your number. But I don't believe your number right now. Show me how you got it. Well, I put this in this model and this model. And anyway, so we've had some head knocking, but it's been fun. It's been great. So then, we now know what the heat loss is. We're there. The next question is, how do you replace it? And the requirements that we drive on this design for the heat loss solution, it's got to be off the shelf. It's got to be in Kathmandu. It's got to be transportable over a 5 to 6 very rugged trail by yaks or porters. And it's got to be long-term sustainable. It does you no good to bring in a high-tech insulation that's available from Dow Corning in the States that's got great R value, but will never survive the trip up there or installation. We got to have something. And so the design, and I'm the big one pushing this, don't show me something fancy that you can only get in the States. Don't want it. We got to have something available. If it breaks, that you can get a replacement, and you got somebody in Kathmandu to talk to. So that's our design requirements for the heat loss. We did do some water quality testing, like I said, and that data is available if anyone wants to see it. That's not part of the design of it. It's kind of a side thing. But there was a Dr. John Katarowski who, under an NSF and an American Alpine Club grant, did water testing at Denali, and then was on his way to Everest and did water testing at Lobuche, Gorak Shep, Camp 2. Yeah. And those results, I mean, what he found at Gorak Shep is they've had 2 springs. One of them was contaminated with E. coli, and one was just marginal. So, but we did that, and I'm not going to spend much time on that. That's not going to affect whether we're going to do this or not. It's just a side thing. And like I say, we did a site survey in May of 2013. We took one of the young, bright engineers and says, you get a month in Gorak Shep. And so he took a feasibility design we had at that time to Gorak Shep. He met with the tea house owners and the porters, with the Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee. He briefed them, as well as biogas, the biogas sector program people. And he met with potential Nepal hardware suppliers. So he spent a month, and from that took input, and as a result, we moved to a different solution. That one will work. There were things that they didn't like about it. And the last thing we've done is, through this process in the 4 years, we keep trying to get a cost estimate, because if we're going to go raise funds for this thing, we got to know how much it costs. And so we start with what in the engineering world, when you really start, and somebody says, tell me how much that's going to cost. Well, we start with what we call a WAG. Anybody else use WAG? Which is a wild ass guess. And then, because you really don't have much basis for it. Yeah. So then you work on it and you start getting some data, and we escalate that. We've done 3 estimates. You're now moved up into a SWAG, which is a scientific wild ass guess. And then ultimately, we've gotten now cost inputs in from BSP and some of the hardware vendors. And so we're at what I call a ROM, a rough order of magnitude. And it's sufficient to say, we got a ballpark now of what this is going to cost to implement this system, including the shelter at Gorak Shep. So we are, and these are some of the design conclusions. I don't know what I pushed to get that. Oh, it went away. Okay. Some of the design conclusions from that thing, it will require shelter over the digester. That's why we were aligning ourselves with Architects Without Borders. They will help us design a shelter over the digester using local materials, local labor, and everything on there has to be transportable up to Gorak Shep. I also lay on the engineers, forget about helicopters. You're not helicoptering equipment in until you prove to me you can't do it by bringing it in by man. The other thing is the effluent, the fertilizer. When you looked at pictures of Gorak Shep, there's nothing to fertilize up there. There's rocks. So the effluent will be disposed of in a normal septic tank drain field kind of configuration, because we're building on a lake bed. That will ultimately change if you moved into a warmer environment where there is something. That, I think, is probably the gold of this whole system, is the fertilizer. But it's going to have to be demonstrated. So we looked at we had 3 feasibility designs, and they're all evaluated under the worst case conditions at Gorak Shep according to TMY2 data. You got to design to meet the worst, and you've got to allow, since we're going to PV panels, you've got to allow that there's going to be a period of time where there'll be little or no solar energy. So everything we've got in there is conservative at this point. I'm okay with that. If we have a baseline, then we can start whittling away at some of the assumptions. But it's been hard to get a baseline. So the other thing that we looked at, was could we provide the heat loss with a passive solar shelter over it? And the answer is no. You've just got too much heat loss in that cold environment. So you're going to have a heating system. So we looked at 2, a PV solar panel array with heated coils in the digester floor. That was the design we took to Gorak Shep in 2013. I personally think it may still come back. I personally think it's the best solution, but BSP didn't like it. They were concerned that if any of those coils broke in the floor, how would you replace them? But it is a really simple design. You have, in the case of the heated water coils, it's a very simple design. So we spent a year now, again with volunteer work helpers, looking at a solar panel, PV array, with battery, that when you charge the batteries up during the day when you have solar energy, and you have an immersion coil, again, all off the shelf. We can buy that immersion coil in Kathmandu any day of the week. So we put an immersion coil into the digester to keep the digester warm and maintain the 30 degrees. And we will, we haven't even talked about it. That will produce so much, I mean, that PV panel or array is going to charge up the batteries when there's solar energy, and then it's got controllers on it. It's got to shut off because it'll cook that digester. So we're going to shut off, but we're still producing electricity. You know anybody at Gorak Shep that might want some extra electricity, Conrad? Yeah. Right. And we haven't even talked about it. So I don't know what the value of that is. But I'm saying we've designed worst case. We know it will get simpler, but we've got a feasibility design. The other thing, as part of that one bullet about replicating, everything we do, we're documenting in what we call a basis of design, a BOD document, so that somebody picks it up and says, where'd you get that? How'd you calculate that? Show me what you used when you calculated the number of solar panels. What'd you use for efficiency? You know, show us the data. And that's what engineers should do. So somebody else can pick it up and says, oh, okay, I understand how they got there, and they don't have to go back and recalculate. And if we can't defend those calculations, then we're not good engineers. Now, to prove that, we're going out to a technical review panel. These are people not associated with the program. These are experts, vice presidents, directors of heating, cooling, and solar energy companies in the Northwest, and saying, we're going to give you our BOD, tell us. We need validation that we've calculated this right, because it's critical. We do not want to fail at Gorak Shep. Yeah. Challenge. Said we should have been drinking. So, let's see. Okay, yeah. So this is this is what it's saying. The heating system has got to replace the system loss of the digester. We also have to have a heating solution that daily we have to feed the digester, which means we bring in 33 kilo of human waste. We add 33 kilo of water, but we do not want to shock the system by dumping something cold in the digester, so we've got to bring that slurry up to about 30 degrees. So we've got two heating requirements. One inside the digester, second outside the digester. So we got about 350 watts of heat that we got to replace. So so we had, that's our two approaches. The solar array with heated coils required about 24 PV solar panels, heavily insulated water storage device. That's where you store the energy. You heat the water in this, you can take it to boiling, and you draw off the water for mixing and the coils, and it requires then some form of a circulation pump. And where we're at today is the number of PV panels has grown, and you'd have a solar battery array with about 30 PV solar panels. Now, to put that in scale, what we're proposing are PV panels that are at the Italian Research Center. They've got a huge array down there of exactly the same panels. They produce about 10 kW, and we need about 5.5 kW. So it's smaller than what you see that's been in operation at the Italian Research Center at Lobichet for about 2 years. So again, off-the-shelf hardware, proven, and we take the risk out of the program. So I've got some quick, this artist concept, not a very pretty shelter. It's made out of local material. The artist in Seattle really didn't know what kind of local material there is at Gorak Shep, but I'll accept it. It looks like it's made in Mesa, Arizona. But it's about a 7 by 7 foot structure, nothing fancy. Big window in it because we'll try to get as much solar energy inside the shelter during the day, then night shades at night to try to retain the heat inside the digester. This is a plan view of it, just showing we'll have inside of it the digester is in the ground, only the dome sticks out. A large 6-meter water storage tank. We know there's plenty of water there because we need, if we're gonna process 12,000 kilo of waste, we need 12,000 kilo of water. We've measured the roofs at Gorak Shep. We know there's plenty of water available. So we got a 6 cubic meter waste tank and a 6 cubic meter water tank, heavily insulated, because we don't want them to freeze. We'll let them go to 0, but the heat to take something from freezing up to 30 versus 0 to 30 is huge. So that's just kind of what it looks like. That's the layout, two tanks, digester in the ground, battery array, solar array outside, and then a drain field for the effluent. A little different view, just showing what's in the ground. And again, all the components are off the shelf. Okay, I'm getting close. I don't know where I'm at on time. Anyway, getting close. The last thing I wanted to talk about was, can you implement it? And that's the one that really, engineers can design, but implementing something like this at Gorak Shep, where we have no expertise in our engineering group. But so I'm laying out to you our vision and strategy. First of all, what we learned from the case studies on KCC, as well as the environmental cleanup on Everest, is you got to demonstrate both economic and an environmental benefit to the community, or it won't happen. And so we've got to demonstrate the economic benefit. I think I've shown you where we think that is. So we got a 3-phase program. Again, we're not a business. First phase, we're going to construct the biogas system at Gorak Shep. We're going to hire and train 2 local Gorak Shep people to operate it, because they got to feed it every day. So we're going to build it at our expense. We're going to go fundraise. It'll be managed then by a Seattle-based team in concert with Engineers Without Borders Seattle, Architects Without Borders for the shelter, and BSP of Nepal. And we know one of the big one of the big things we have to do is hire the right Nepalese Gorak Shep foreman for the construction. And then as part of that, the plan is, we used to call them operational test and evaluation. Once it's built, we're going to operate and run that for a year through the cycle with water to prove that, in fact, through the worst of the conditions, we can maintain the internal temperature at 30 degrees before we load it. So I'm not happy with that schedule. It's a year delay, another 14 ton of human waste being dumped at Gorak Shep or below. But I think that's a good risk reduction. Make sure it works. If it works with water, it'll work with human waste mixed with water. So we got a year operation. We've got 2 trained operators. Obviously, it's going to require approval of what we're doing. And we've proposed, SPC has been exposed to this, and they're still chewing on it. But they haven't said no. Then phase 2 is really what this whole seminar is all about. How do you sustain it? When the circus team from Seattle leaves, Gorak Shep is built, it's running, everything is wonderful. Who owns it? Because we're not an entity, and we shouldn't own it. And so there's a question, and SPC's asking us this. When you leave town, it's working. You got people trained, you've got the manuals. Who owns it? And what we're proposing, and again, this is a concept, we're proposing the ownership of it would be SPCC, or I personally believe it'll be the tea house owners. When they see the economic value of $8,100 worth of gas they don't have to buy, I think they're going to say, yeah, we'll take over. But I don't know. That's down the road, other than we're thinking on it. And then what we would provide would be technical, operational support with a team from Seattle, our team, Engineers Without Borders, SPCC, and BSP, so that operator's got a number to call. He says, something's going wrong, I'm not getting gas. He's got people to call and say, what's going on? And we can get a team there to go up and say, let's look at it. What's going on with it? But don't let it shut down, because it's going to run year-round, even in the worst of the weather. We're going to run this thing 365 days a year. And the sizing of the digester is based on processing all 12,000 kilo of that waste in about 9 months. So we've got some reserve in there because SPC is already asking us, what about the tea house waste? And we're hoping we're going to get some of that kitchen waste. We'd love to have the kitchen waste. Throw it in. It'll process. And it'll help us with carbon-nitrogen ratio. Now, Conrad's here. He hasn't left. So the kicker, I put the last bullet there, is how are you going to fund that? Who's going to pay for those 2 operators? And our proposal would be that it would be a fee. That's part of it's the climber's poop. I'm sorry. And so we would propose that they're already paying for this. One way or another, they're paying for it. As a climber, I paid to have my poop hauled down, one way or another. And so if there was a slight addition to my climbing fee because they said, hey, you're already paying to have it hauled to Gorak Shep, now they're just going to haul it to your digester. That cost is the same, but somebody's got to pay for those 2 operators, and that's going to be you. And I'm not an operator, Conrad. I'm not trying to get in trouble, but as a climber, I'd say I'd pay that in a flash because I personally can't live with what I saw. So that's up for debate, but at least we have it. Okay. So last chart. Remember the 5 bullets? This is the 5th one. That means I'm off stage. I'm going to tell you what I told you, I hope. We think it'll work. Technically, that's what we are. We're engineers. Technically, it'll work. I think implementation of it is the challenge because we're not skilled in that, and I seek advice from those of you that know and can help us get this thing implemented. Our team is committed through construction and initial operation, the IoT&E section of this thing. They're enthused about it. We've gone through a lot of engineers. Our plan is to start fundraising for the system this year. I believe we can start construction. I mean, the digester exists. The design for the digester exists. We don't need to do much more. We can start digging a hole next year. Unless I get stoned, I think the contact with the climbing community so far has been very positive. You guys could tell me differently. And we're going to need financial support. And what I'm really seeking is advice. We're in an area that engineers are not, geopoliticals, they didn't teach that in engineering school. So I'm open for ideas, comments. Again, the design is an open book. I'll share it with anybody. It's in work, and thank you.
Why don't we take one question for Garry, and you're going to join us for dinner.
Oh, yeah.
So, again, that's the opportunity for people to really query him. So is there a question?
Yeah.
Just, have you considered doing a pilot?
Yes.
Pilot one?
Yes.
Small-scale
Yes.
site?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. We talked about. I mean, this has been a specific discussion the team had. I guess I kind of drove the conclusion on that. It says, hey, the cost of doing, let's take 4 cubic meter. The cost to do a 4 is not that much less, and it'll add another year to the program. I want this. I'm an end product. I want to see this happen, and I saw there's another year. So that is possible. I thought you were going to ask me. Can I ask him this question? I thought he was going to ask me. Well, why don't you take the stuff down lower? Why would you build this at Gorak Shep? Why don't you take it on down lower where it's warmer? There. Costs. We may. But I mean, we could take it down lower to say Ferrochet, which is what? That's about 14,000. Yeah, about 14. It would be warmer. You're still going to have heating, and we're hoping this design is scalable such that you say if you replicate it lower, warmer, you won't need quite as many solar panels, quite as many batteries. Go ahead.
Dallas, Steven?
Actually, I don't think that this would be like a community project in the future. I think every lodge will want one. If you can prove it in Gorak Shep, like I told you yesterday, if you can prove it, I'll build it myself as well. And every lodge will do it. There are some technical questions I'll speak to you over there, but I think if you can make this work, I think you'd be a hero.
just want to make it work.
All right. I'm going to thank you very